Well, time for a chat with another of our MHKs, and I'm really starting by concentrating on obviously the press conferences that happen each night, get reaction and that sort of thing. And a member of the health department, of course, is Clare Barber, who joins us now. Claire, did you have a chance to see last night's press conference, and what do you think to it?
Yes, I've been tuning into all the press conferences. We do get a few minutes heads up, but we do find that we get a large quantity of information from the press conferences, and then it often raises questions, as you might anticipate. I think yesterday showed for me the importance of making sure that we stick with a very clear structure to those press conferences, so people know that at the beginning you're going to get the numbers, the statistics.
But we didn't. That's the whole problem, didn't we? I mean, yesterday's was quite unusual. Normally it always starts with numbers.
And I think that's what I mean. So it's really important to stick with a structure. People know that the anticipation is you'll get the numbers first. Some people only really come on for the numbers. And you could see that play out, in fact, with the comments that were coming up in the various forums I was seeing, where people were saying, oh, have I missed the comments? Missed the numbers. And of course, it wasn't they'd missed the numbers, there just hadn't been any numbers. And then we moved on to the vaccination numbers, but the numbers for the testing and the positive cases just didn't seem to be there. So I think it's really, really important, just as it's important to have consistency in terminology and things that people can understand very simply so they can make actions that suit themselves and their own situation and take responsibility for their own health and welfare. It's also really important that people have those numbers and that structure is maintained.
I mean, conspiracy theorists are running wild on this one because, I mean, even Mr. Ashford couldn't find the number initially. He had to go back online and spend some time on his iPad. I mean, should we be worried? Is something there that we don't want to hear about yet, or something? I mean, or we're just making something out of nothing? A mountain out of a molehill, as the Chief Minister said to me the other day.
I think the risk always is, if the numbers aren't kept in a consistent form, people will find gaps and they will fill any areas where there isn't information with speculation. And that's been my point from the beginning is, you know, I've got nothing to suspect that there's falsifications of numbers. I don't think it's in anyone's interest. I really don't think that's the case. But where there's not consistency of information, people will speculate. And that, for me, is a concern. I think it's absolutely crucial. We've seen just this week the terminology now for the cases have changed. Something I raised in Tynwald some time ago was that they'd changed the terminology to this active cases non-community, which appeared to be because there was a nervousness about saying we had cases in the community. So they had split that community out into community and active cases non-community, something which always seemed a little odd to me, based on the fact that if the cases are active, you're only going to have them isolating when you know that they're active, which means you've tested them, which means they're therefore not community. So you couldn't ever have had a case that was community by that weird sort of structuring of a definition. We've now lost that completely in favour of simply cases that are active and cases that then out of that number are associated with travel. Now, for me, that should have been an in addition rather than an instead of. So we've now actually got slightly less information, whereas I think we should be absolutely transparent and robust with that information and making sure public have access to it.
It's fascinating you saying that, because we keep hearing from the Chief Minister, I want to be open and honest with you. But as you say, it looks like they're shielding or changing, manipulating, whatever you want to use word-wise, instead of just saying, look, these are what's going on, this is what's happening, and that's where we're at today. And that doesn't seem to be happening, does it?
And that's something I raised previously. You know, for me, there's two elements to this. There's the World Health Organization definitions, which absolutely we should be capturing our data against so that we can be compared to every other jurisdiction in the world. That's absolutely fundamental. And that work should be going on. Then there's also, however, there's the element which is simply making it understandable for you and me and every other person in the street so that we know, is this just related to cases that came back and the people they've been in contact with, or actually do we have some cases where we're not really sure where it's come from? And when you go to Tesco, don't walk around being blasé. There are other stores available, but don't walk around being blasé. Do wear your mask if you can. Make sure you stay away from people and do use the hand gels and the wipe downs for the trolleys and the baskets. That's really important information.
And I asked about an R number that wasn't available. Do you think those sort of things also should be added on now?
I mean, the R number is something I'd asked for very early on and was told that it was, I think I put a House of Keys question in back in April sometime and was told that this was not really, irrelevant information because our numbers were so low. It seems that with the new variant of COVID that the numbers for the R are significantly higher. But I'm not convinced necessarily that that's the most important piece of information. I think more important is the awareness that there is a risk that there are people who do have it and don't know they have it because of the asymptomatic nature of this. And actually, therefore, you need to take responsibility and accountability for your own behaviours in terms of not going out if you can avoid it. So absolutely reducing that to the minimum, making sure that if you can, you wear a mask, and acknowledging that some people, for many reasons, can't wear masks. And therefore, it's almost incumbent on the rest of us to really make sure we do that well to protect those people who can't. Keeping areas ventilated, keeping windows open if we can. I know it's cold, I know it's not ideal, but ultimately we're looking at health and safety here, so we want to do things right. And making sure we're really focusing on hand hygiene, wiping down, and just really thinking, being really conscious of that. So I think making sure we have structured information that is consistent is absolutely key for me.
Well, information being passed on 4 o'clock is when everyone tunes in. That's when everyone's there on a live broadcast. They didn't have that list available of these low-risk areas, which some 3 hours later before it was produced. Do you think they should have had that information, or at least whatever they had at the time of 4 o'clock, release it there and then? Because obviously there's concern, amongst other things, that the Guernsey Theatre Panto was in that list of low-risk areas.
And I'm confident they did have that information available. I'm not sure what the hold up was in terms of actually then issuing that into the public domain. Certainly it worries me again that the businesses got that information out before government did. And there's a fine balance. There's a fine balance to allow businesses to get their PR and communications right, because they need to protect their customers and make sure their business is protected. But there should be a coordinated approach to that, to say, right, we can all go live at and give a time that everyone's going to go together. And I think that's really important as well, because we don't want to damage businesses. We saw the concern the first time that there was a list of businesses, and I wouldn't want to see businesses put in a difficult position. And they've obviously then got to field numerous inquiries from people who are rightly and understandably concerned.
These events are stage managed at some point. Someone's writing the scripts for the Chief Minister, saying what to do. Do you think he's being badly advised, or certainly off the mark slightly now that he's not getting that information out to the public?
I think they've increased the speed at which they're getting information out to the public, which I think is positive in terms of cases, when cases are coming out. So we had the situation over New Year's Eve where there seemed to be this stasis with no information for a period of time. That seems to have not been the case this time. We've had information much quicker after the original case and the contact tracing's happened, which I think is a real positive. And I think we should really focus that there is some really good work going on in terms of getting this out in a faster speed. And obviously, I also appreciate the contact tracing team. If you've got hundreds of contacts, this is a massive, massive potential piece of work for one case.
What would you have done on New Year's Eve, though? Because there was that 10 o'clock in the morning, they knew there had been a case. I raised this. They said no, they were not going to put it in the public domain. They didn't want to scare people. And yet, obviously, that night, as it turned out in Ramsey, was a very big night, potentially, for where we're at now. Do you think they were badly advised not to put that information out at 10 o'clock in the morning, just to say there has been a case in the community?
Personally, I think the best situation is to get the information out as early as possible. And I raised that when we had the case, the previous cluster of cases, the small cluster, because that was something where I obviously did an interview with yourself. I did an interview with Manx Radio also, because they left it. There was about 2 days elapsed there prior to them actually putting the information out, because they were still doing contact tracing. And I, as you've just said, my thoughts would be very much, as soon as you know there's a case, it's absolutely right to get some information out to explain that not all the information is available and that contact tracing is ongoing. But it just allows people then to manage their own behaviours, which, as I say, is a really important part of this.
Well, I said you work in the health area, and obviously you have been a nurse, but there's concern maybe that there's been a slowish sort of rollout of the vaccine. The very first over 80s got it in Newlands only, I think, yesterday when they mentioned it there. Does that seem right to you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been very closely sort of cited on the work around vaccinations, and actually I'm comfortable with the process we're doing. I think that we're in a position where other places have decided not to follow the manufacturer's recommendations in terms of the timeframes. That's something I wouldn't be comfortable with. That would affect our indemnity potentially, and I think that would be a risky situation to put ourselves in, where although we know that we do have cases in the community here, there actually is a relatively low number at this time. So I think there has to be a balance. And I actually, I'm seeing the work that's happening within health, and I'm comfortable with the way in which we're doing this. I think what's important is that we get ourselves to a position where we're doing as many vaccinations as is appropriate in terms of our supply, in terms of the cohorts that we're looking to do, doing it in a proper and systematic way with all of the risk assessments and reviews necessary, but also ensuring we have the capacity for the 3-week vaccine, because we can't be, if we were to do 3,000 this week, in 3 weeks we're going to be needing to do 6,000. So every time we do it, we've got to look at the doubling effect. So I think that from what I'm seeing in terms of the projections, we're absolutely doing this appropriately. If we were to start getting thousands of vaccines turning up on a tray, then I think that would absolutely be something we'd need to review. If the delivery schedules change, then we would be looking at how we change the vaccination schedules.
I think people just always look to what's going on in Jersey and Guernsey, I suppose, as a sort of relative where we are or where we should be. And do you think that's not a good idea just to follow them then?
I think it depends. So I think that it's absolutely important that we look at other jurisdictions, and then we have to look at that within our own sphere of what's happening in terms of testing and cases. So we know that they have made a choice not to follow the manufacturer's recommendations, and that's something that they'll have done, and they'll have risk assessed that. That's something that at this point we don't think is appropriate for us.
And finally, I think the Chief Minister said he's going to have 3 press conferences a week, but today therefore there wouldn't be one, but there's going to be obviously the 4 o'clock release. If it's bad, do you think he should get in front of the cameras again?
I mean, I think if there's questions that need answering, then it's absolutely appropriate that he gets in front of the cameras. And I think he's in something of a rock and a hard place, because when you commit to Monday, Wednesday and Friday, the minute you put one in on Tuesday and Thursday, you create fear and panic. And that's absolutely not what we need. What we need is it to just be a very measured, this is the information. And it almost needs to be a demand-led, we'll do it when we need to, but then people worry they haven't got information. So I think that I really do understand that this is a difficult balancing act for him. I think probably Monday, Wednesday and Friday is a compromise for now, but it may well need reviewing. And I think if there is information that comes out, then it's absolutely right that he makes himself available to answer those questions that the public want answers to.
And finally, are members now getting briefed more? Because at one stage you were hearing it almost from the press conference. You said now you're getting to hear things just before it goes public. Is that working all the time, and is it working well?
So it's a relatively recent evolution of the briefings, but I think it's a really positive one. So certainly the last couple of times we have had briefings put in at relatively short notice, but that's perfect. That's exactly how it should be. It should be coming up on a demand basis to keep members absolutely in the loop, but also to make sure that we can ask our questions, so that once the messaging does come out, we feel confident and able to go back and respond to queries from constituents, and to try and alleviate some of that concern that can be generated when you put lists of premises out that people may well have been in. So I think it's important that we try and work together and united for the island, but equally that we do hold government to account and scrutinise where appropriate. And
I'm guessing your feedback is going to be 50-50, open borders, shut borders, more vaccinations, do this, do that. I mean, it must be a tricky one to deal with, those sort of queries.
Yeah, so I mean, from my perspective, I think I've been relatively clear on the borders throughout. I'm comfortable with having some border restrictions. I think that's absolutely appropriate. I think, the Chief Minister has on occasion stated that we want the borders open. That's absolutely, I'm sure, not the case for any member that I've spoken to. However, what we do, I shouldn't speak for other people, but what I certainly feel is that if we have a comprehensive programme in terms of our testing and our isolation, then we need to look at how we can start to unpick the borders, because the reality is there are businesses on this island who struggle to get employees over. That needs to be done in a managed way. It can't be just a carte blanche for anyone coming over here. But there are some businesses where if you can't get an employee over who's quite a key part of that business, the whole business eventually has to shut down. And I think we need to look at how we manage that. So that's a concern I have. And equally, for compassionate reasons, I think there's been some very compelling reasons that people might need to travel, whether that be end of life care, terminal illness. And I think it would be very unfortunate if those people look back in a few weeks' time and think, well, I can come now, but it's just too late, because you can't replay those things. And I know that does weigh heavily on the Chief Minister's mind. He has spoken with members about that, and I know that's something they are looking at. But I hope that with the testing strategies in place, and more comprehensive, with robust isolation processes in place, then we will be able to look at a more pragmatic borders rule very soon.